We welcome Brad Braddock from Meeting Street Capital, one of our board members and a partner here at Meeting Street Capital, the investment firm that led our last fundraising round. So we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the fireside chat.
This is our first fireside chat with an investor, and this is a part of Coffee with Case Status, a campaign we're running this quarter that just focuses on update your clients and the time it takes to drink your cup of coffee, and in the same way that we push to make our clients operationally efficient, we want our staff to be engaged and efficient and happy. And so today is a direct response to some questions that they've had about what is a board, what are investors, what do they do, where do they come from, and are they from outer space? So our goal today is to answer some of those questions. So if you're good with it, we'll jump right in.
Let's go.
Awesome. So just to start, are you a native to Charleston?
First of all, thanks for having me. Definitely not. I moved to Charleston in 2003. I thought I was going to be here for 4 years, and we'll probably talk about this later in the talk. But I came to Blackbaud, and I thought I would do my 4 years and head back. And I kind of feel like I was a frog that was brought to a slow boil, and by the time it was time to leave, I couldn't get out.
Did a young Brad Braddock dream of growing up to be an investor?
Definitely not. I was born in the Northeast. Moved out to the Bay Area in California, and pretty much most of what I thought about growing up was like what a lot of guys do. Thought there was a professional athlete trapped in this body somewhere, and for better or for worse, I grew really late, and I knew I was going to get into business, but growing late had the added benefit of forcing me to focus on my grades. So some pluses and some minuses, but yeah, and being an investor was the furthest thing from my mind.
Growing up in splitting your time at least in San Francisco in the we won't call the time, but in pre and post tech bubble, what was it like in that time?
It was. California changes so often, and it's clearly a little bit of a different place now, but it was kind of a place where people were trying a lot of different things. There was a real estate boom. The first computers were starting to kind of happen at the time, but there wasn't a high-tech industry or anything. Ultimately, that came to dominate the economy of the state. But it was a good place to grow up in the sense that there was always a very strong entrepreneurial bent to the place, and I kind of, if I think about it now, just what my friends' parents did in high school, I don't think any of them did the same thing. Mm-hmm. They're all doing different things, big, small. You didn't even kind of call it startups then, but it always had that. That was part of the culture there. Mm-hmm. It always was.
Gotcha. And did you stay in town for college and then postgraduate?
I started off in the Northeast. My parents separated. My father actually moved to England to work. His career took him there. And then he remarried, and my mother remarried and moved out to California. And so I got this, I had a nice broad perspective, for a kid, and got to travel in Europe. And ultimately decided to go back to the Northeast for college. I went to Dartmouth. But always felt like I was really lucky, as a kid, just getting to see a lot of the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. What did your early career look like?
So, my very first job out of college, actually, I was in France at the time, or in Europe at the time. Parisians thought that Paris was going to be the center of Europe for business, and so all these U.S. multinationals were going to move there. This is 1990 or so, and so I got a job in advertising actually in Paris for a year, which was great to live in Paris. I had a bunch of great experiences there, and I spoke French, fairly well at the time. But the job was really, there was no substance to it. It was all those plans of Paris being the center of the business world never materialized. In fact, that sector went into a recession. And so I scrambled my way back to New York, and I got a job as a management consultant, which was actually great training at the time. It was a lot of what I was doing then and learning was how do businesses work? What are the processes that drive them? Because most of the work we did was we took a business process and we described it and documented it, and then we looked at how can we optimize it. In those days, you would optimize things not with technology. You would reduce and redeploy the workforce, but that was a good foundation to just understand how businesses worked. And I got equally as important. Most of my work was done with a credit card company as the major client, and the credit card companies have in their databases they have just a wealth of information. They were kind of learning how to make use of it. And it's funny, we had the consultancy I was with had a war games division, and we took the credit card data and just threw it over to them and asked them to do some segmentation on it. And then they didn't know credit cards from telephone databases. They didn't really care. They were just doing really early iterations of kind of data science and really looking for patterns, and so we did all this stuff manually, but it certainly kind of started planting some seeds that you don't even think about at the time, but later on in your career they kind of come back to you when you're trying to understand something that's more complex. You can kind of think back, well, where did this stuff come from?
Right.
And so I went to after I was in the management consultancy, I went to business school at Harvard, and a lot of my classmates were going into the traditional functions of consulting and investment banking. But this was 90, 94, 95, 96. You were really starting to see in the economy a shift to what they were calling the high-tech sector.
Right.
Certainly there was, companies like Xerox and IBM and Hewlett-Packard that were well-known companies, but something was happening, and the internet, was just really getting going at the time. And I, having been an English major, I said to myself, I've got to make myself credible. I've got to take a job in a real company and learn what's going on. So
Right.
I went out and worked, went back to the Bay Area, worked at Intel for a couple of years and did marketing and product management and some demand forecasting. But I'd be in these meetings and I'd look around the conference room and I'd be, from a technical perspective, completely overmatched. And I knew that, this company needs people like that, and they probably don't need as many people like me. But that allowed me to kind of move over to the software world.
Got it.
And so I left. I joined a company that was doing a lot of what I'd been doing as a consultant, but they were doing it with technology. And so they were taking a big database, and they were segmenting it, and they built a platform on top of that where you could drive marketing campaigns. So these were the first marketing automation companies, and but that was a real natural, progression from what I had been doing, and kind of joined the software world, and at that time, and effectively have never left it, and spent most of my the next 20 years running marketing and strategy and product management for software companies.
Nice. Now, I know you lived through then the tech bubble and then the eventual bursting of it. What were some of the challenges that you faced in kind of that post-bubble bursting climate?
Yeah, it's so hard to describe. One of the scenes I remember was I was with a company. We were one of the last ones to go public, and then and it was we weren't ready to go public, but everyone was going public, and investors saw opportunities for liquidity and figured if you could raise money, maybe you could figure it out. You know, and anyway, we didn't figure it out, but a lot of others didn't. But I remember at one point just being in an office building in San Francisco, looking out at the bay, really high rise. They're literally helicopters that were flying beneath my office, and the office building was completely empty.
Oh, man.
And you would drive by these, you know, brand new buildings that have been built in Silicon Valley, and just completely, you know, empty. And you know, it was just a weird time because you didn't know what was real and what wasn't. You knew that a lot of the ideas, even though they had been underfunded and kind of blew up, they were good ideas, and it was just everything, the sequence just got out of whack, and all this money poured in, and but it was just a really surreal time. I always joke that I was trying to figure out, you know, what I was going to do next, and I ultimately joined another software company, but I kept seeing this job, this ad for this company called Google, and it was to run marketing. I'm like, what's Google?
What's a Google?
What is that? That's never going to amount to anything. So, but it was just just an unusual time. Like I've never, you know, since experienced anything like it. But again, after it all blew up, some of the, you know, biggest and best companies all kind of grew out of that tough period of time, and it trained a lot of people too. I mean, there were a lot of lessons learned there, but it was expensive.
Yeah.
Expensive lessons.
Yeah, I'm sure having to work through that wartime, you know, strengthens some muscles and teaches you some new things and kind of forces you to adapt maybe faster than you would otherwise. Now, what ultimately brought you to Charleston?
So I was literally running marketing at a software company, and I bumped into an old business school classmate, and he said, "Hey, do you want to, you know, we bought a company in Charleston. We need someone to run marketing and help take the company public." And I literally was considering that or an opportunity in Europe. And I went home, and my kids were 2 and 4, and we had never been to the South, and we thought, well, Europe, South, it seemed both, you know, about as far.
Forum.
But at least we'll speak the same language here.
Right.
But, you know, we just thought it would be a great adventure to try a different part of the country. The kids were very portable, and, you know, it ended up being a really good decision.
Yeah. So how long did you stay at Blackballed, and then what ultimately, you know, drove your career towards investing?
So I stayed at Blackballed for about 4 years. You know, I was brought there to, you know, help take the company public, you know, launch new products, and build a marketing organization, and it, you know, had a great time doing all of that. The person that hired me left. I, having been in Silicon Valley and seen all this kind of exciting startup stuff, and in a growth mindset kind of always from the beginning of my career, really wanted to test myself out as an entrepreneur. So I through my father, I connected with a guy who had built a market research offering, a platform, and I really liked what it did. It was a natural extension of my interest in marketing and how to launch new products and gain customer feedback and all that stuff. And so I wrote a business plan, and I helped fund the company, and then I went from managing 100 people to managing myself and taking out the garbage, but great experience. Just you know, had a chance to had both the responsibility and the opportunity of kind of learning each function from the ground up, and I'll get to the answer to your question in terms of how I got to be an investor. But this was an important part of that path where I started, learning things about, in terms of evaluating and moving forward in terms of growing a business, how important it is to kind of get the sequence of things right. And so some of those things I did well, and some of them I did really poorly, but I had a lot of direct experience, and I had my own money in it. So it was, there was a lot of learning. I also learned a lot about founders. We ultimately kind of, scraped our way through a tough financial period and got to where we raised money, and the founder really didn't want to let go at all. And I understood that, but it took me living through it to really understand it, because this was his baby, and as much as I was going to, be able to help him, I was never going to feel the same way about it. And I could probably, there was we reached an impasse, and I just, he bought me out, and, but I still wanted to, I kind of felt like I was kind of getting closer to what I wanted to do. And so the next thing I did was I went out to buy a data business, and I just had happened to learn a lot about that world and felt like it was underserved, and got very close to buying a data business. And we couldn't come to terms, but we learned enough about the space that the guy that I partnered up with, we just said, let's just do it ourselves. And so I funded that, and we got off to a great start. Had some great couple of months, and then a lot of bad luck and bad decisions kind of caught up to us. And some was really bad luck. We had a crucial data partner passed away, and we randomly got sued. But you are learning a lot during this period, and what I had done with this data business is I didn't think it was ever going to be that big. So I kind of cordoned it off from the rest of my kind of professional life, and it just became kind of a little test lab where I could try out ideas, and if I could find something that would really work, then we could put more money around it. I still have that business now. It true to my initial thoughts on it, it was never going to be that big, but I probably learned as much from that as anything. And I had, even as far back as when I was back in California, I'd been periodically talking to investors and saying, I kind of think all these experiences I've had are, would really benefit a company, whether I'm advising them or investing them. And I was continuing to have those discussions with investors in various stages of investment. I ultimately, at that same time, one of the original investors in Blackbaud brought me back into their fold, and I did a very similar stint to what I had done with Blackbaud, where I ran marketing in a part of the company, and that got sold. And when that got sold, I was looking for the next thing to do. I bumped into my current business partner, Bud Watts, who had the complete opposite of my career. He was initially flew F-16s, but after he got out of the armed forces, and went to business school, he became an investment banker, and he was, in that context, really looking at, taking these businesses and their trajectory and maximizing the value you could get for them. And then he became and led the technology practice for the Carlyle Group. And what he was doing there, a lot of, was finding big platform companies in good software segments, and then helping them grow, whether through acquisition or just getting more management talent and stuff like that. So we started talking, and we both had this idea that the Southeast, or parts of the Southeast, whether it be Charleston, Charlotte, Jacksonville, Columbia, Greenville, they were just not being served well with investors. And then if you pick the right types of companies with the right attributes and the right founders in the right markets, you could be successful. And so we would meet over at the bar at Little Jack's, and finally, I don't even know how it happened. It was about 4.5 years ago. We just kind of said, well, are we going to do this or not? And he had been doing it already and was already proving that it was working. But we formalized the approach somewhere around the beginning of 2018.
And for those who don't maybe know the difference between a true, a venture fund and the way that Median Street, your thesis works and the way that you invest, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, with traditional venture funds, and it's gotten very much more mature than it used to be, you're typically in a very defined stage. You could be early stage, you could be Series A, Series B, growth. And within those stages, you're fairly constrained in terms of what you can invest in. And what's really different from us is that those funds they've raised other people's money, typically from endowments, and these are large checks. And when those organizations write those checks, they're writing it against a very specific criteria because they've got a big portfolio of money, and they don't want to be overexposed in, say, early stage when they need some late stage stuff.
Right.
And they're really thinking about portfolio balance. And for most of us, we just think we want our investments to grow. But those entities are really also concerned with asset preservation. They can't, as much as they want them to grow, they'll sacrifice growth for making sure that when a dot-com bubble bursts, they don't get crushed. They need to think that way. So that's how and because they raise money from others, there's reporting requirements and disclosure requirements, another form of almost bureaucracy that they have to manage. We are just private capital, and we so it's by and large our money, and because of that we don't have as many constraints, but also because of that we have to we've got to make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but to some degree, because these markets, it's always going to be harder in the markets that we're in to have that 100x. We can focus on companies that maybe others would overlook, and be patient with them and help them get the formula right.
Right.
And we have a specific way in terms of the way we allocate the money that we think is in the best interest of the company too. Because if you get too much money too early before you've kind of figured things out, what's going to happen to that money? It's going to burn quickly,
Right.
and that's going to hurt the option holders as well as the investors.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we are a little different in that respect. We don't have as many. We'll look at things on almost every level. We tend to like, and we can talk about case status. We tend to like, when we first saw, case status was great timing for us. Where there's some customers, there's a real product there. There's real affirmation that people are willing to part with money to. Everyone's going to say in a demo that they love your product, but can you get someone to part with money and sign a contract of some sort? So, that's some of the other things and that we're really focused on is, in our core thesis, is that if we can find in a good vertical market, the market that case status serves is a perfect description of a vertical market. And with a domain expert that knows as much about the space as anyone else, complemented with some team members that can hold them accountable, and a business-to-business SaaS company in that framework is right down the middle for us.
Yeah.
That's what we look for. We feel like, you know, like 5 or 6 years ago, you couldn't have done this here. It's just there wasn't enough talent and ambition and enough experience where people had done different things where you could draw, you know, I need this type of leader. Oh, here's someone who's actually done it. Whereas, you know, and they're right here. Yeah, you're going to bring people in from out of town, but you still need to have a little bit of a critical mass of people who've got some, like, you know, the same reason that I think I can, you know, help as an investor because I have a lot of scar tissue. I've made mistakes. I've had, you know, things that have worked, and you just need to have a little bit of that. And these markets are now having more of that around them. And you used to need more engineers, and you can make up a little bit of that with outsourced development, but you also have engineers that, you know, they can live anywhere. They decide to live in Charleston. So a lot of that is just different than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let me ask you this: how active are you typically in the investments that you make?
Good question. So we have about 30 investments, 20 of which we're very passive in, and those we're in, you know, to make a return, but we're often brought in by one of the other institutional investors that we often work with, and we'll just help round out a round. So those aren't major positions per se. It provides a lot of benefits in addition to, you know, hopefully they're great companies, but we learn from it. We maintain a strong network for our companies once they're ready for that type of capital. And we get to stay strong in sectors and segments that we really, you know, want to stay strong in. Then there's another 10 investments that we're very active in. We're either on the board or we're, you know, influential in the sense that founders will and management teams will actually, you know, listen to us and hear us out. And those range from, you know, we got in with one of them where it was 2 guys and a set of wireframes to, you know, to companies that are about $1 million in ARR starting. But, you know, we've been doing this for over, you know, 4 years now. We have a lot that have, you know, really graduated and are doing well. And it's been exciting. It's been a lot of fun.
How important is culture when you're evaluating companies to invest in?
You know, it's arguably the most important thing. And, you know, when we're looking at the founders, we really that's one of the things we're trying to process.
Right.
What kind of is this person? Can this person hire people that are better than he or she is? Can this person develop? What's the dynamic going to be if there's disagreement, and how are they going to deal with the fact that, you know, that's the old Mike Tyson quote, you know, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. What's going to happen once that happens? Because it's going to happen. So, you know, we always like to tell a story. Probably, you know, one of our fastest growing companies was that these 2 guys show up with a wireframe, and we immediately really liked the space. We could tell that the non-technical founder knew the business problem so well that you could put him in a room with a piece of paper and you could probably sell a software contract. But what really impressed us was that in that meeting, those 2 got in an argument, and it was respectful, but you could tell that they were going to hold each other accountable, and, you know, and they were, as long as they're going to be rowing in the same direction, they were going to be able to build a culture that was going to be able to, you know, to win. And you know, most of our companies, of those 10, and I could probably kind of walk through it, almost every single one of them is in a market space where they're competing with an incumbent that maybe, you know, doesn't have the same edge that they did when they were
a little sleepy.
Up. Yeah, a little sleepy. That's a polite term. So it's that culture that really, really matters.
Yeah. Now, switching gears to talk a little bit more about case status, you hit on this a little bit, but what initially
I mean, you talked about what initially piqued your interest in case status. What ultimately got you across the finish line when we approached you about investment and you ultimately led our last funding round?
Yeah, I mean, so we've been watching case status since, I guess you and Lauren showed up. I don't know when the first was.
2018.
2018. And we got very interested, and we do have one kind of rule, which is if something goes to Atlanta, DC, or RTP, those markets are very well served with folks like us. And we kind of missed you guys because you're off at Techstars, but the two of us stayed in touch. We still felt like it was right down right in the middle of the strike zone for us. And ultimately, when there was an opportunity to invest, when you came back, and the company had gone through what a lot of companies, go through, which is it's a lot of learning, and it's trying to find that right customer profile. And we started doing phone calls with your customers, and what we look at, and the way companies are valued in our world is there are a lot of variables, but the three that seem to matter the most, particularly in the early stage, is how fast are you growing? What is your gross margin? In other words, are you able to, as you serve your customers, provide enough, financial value back to the company so it can continue to prosper? And then what is your churn like? How many of your customers that on January 1 are still with you, either at the end of the year or when the contract closes? And we saw potential in the growth rate. The gross margin, was fine, was good. Churn was a question mark, and we started doing, calls with customers, and we expect in the early days that there's going to be churn. We don't like it. No one likes it.
Right.
But it happens, and it happens for a variety of reasons, mainly because the company's trying to grow quickly. And in the case-to-case status, it's a new concept. So there's some behavioral change that has to happen in some of these organizations. That's just not going to happen. So we went back and forth and really ultimately concluded that the company had identified what the ideal customer profile is. In other words, if you could talk to these folks and sell them, they were going to stay. They were and found some really passionate advocates for the product and for the company and the individuals servicing them. And so then we did some more work on the market and just learned, so when you have an investment like this and you get excited about it, then you'll also say, well, what areas can we improve, and how will that, and in what order? Doesn't matter. But first of all, it's a testament to you for continuing to just keep talking to us, and I like the fact that you were really persistent, and that mattered to us a lot too. And the person that we talked to in 2018, that Andy Seavers is not the same one we talked to in 2021. You'd learned a ton, and that kind of goes back to how we look at the culture and the organizational chart and the what kind of future employees you're going to be able to attract.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. As a now a board member on our case status board, what do you see as your primary contribution to the board? The way that you see the value that you bring really to the company. What do you see as the primary value?
Well, I think it's first of all, let's continue to do the things we're doing well and find ways to accelerate that and almost solidify it. So if you have 2 good months in sales, how do we have 12? And just learn from that. Again, let's not make some of the mistakes that I've made in the past in my career. But I guess the most important thing that I would, so I have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. And I think getting the sequence of what to focus on when would be probably the thing I focus on the most. And that's because there's, at this stage in the company's growth and with the amount of capital on the balance sheet, you're not going to solve all of the opportunities and challenges in the business. Which are the ones that you can solve now that will allow you to better solve the others, that you can maybe deal with in the future.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would say. Everyone can draw a picture of what the perfect business looks like.
Right.
But we don't have that luxury. We have, how do we get from A to B to C to D? And by the way, the company's on a great roll right now. It's really, I go home at night, I tell my wife I'm a great investor, But I didn't have anything to do with this. I think you guys have really started to figure some stuff out, and there's been some very impressive validation.
Yeah, well, you're modest. You contribute a lot in the success that especially we've seen in the last 6 months, and continue to push forward with. We've talked a lot about, or a little bit about data and some of the things that you looked for when initially investing in the company. What are some of the data elements that you think really become important for us to focus on for future success?
Well, let me answer that generally first,
Sure.
And then we'll get specific. It just happens. It's always going to happen as a company goes from, say, 1 million to 3 million, that the demands by investors for more data to understand what's happening are going to rise. But one of the reasons that happens is this point you're starting to optimize your marketing function, your sales function, your customer service and support function, your finance and operations, and the data. It's still the best tool that you're going to have to plot that out. What we need to do as investors when we're demanding this data is make sure we're not asking you and the company for things that aren't going to help you today. Because really, we're just trying to get better every day. What is the potential for case status, and how do we realize that? So so that's really where that comes from. That and each function has its own data elements. From a corporate perspective, those three the growth and the margin and the churn are the things we'll probably focus most on. In sales, we're looking at the speed to close, the size of the deals, the efficiency of the sales force. In marketing, it's fairly similar. You'll look at and then you can throw those two together, where you'll look at maybe your cost of customer acquisition, which would be if you add sales plus marketing, those are the resources that go into finding out, to acquiring a customer. And then you go, okay, well, we spent all that money to acquire a customer, how much is that customer worth? And then there's a little formula you use to figure out, well, how long does it take for us to pay back that acquisition cost? And so that's a good way to understand it's called the CAC to LTV ratio. And if you love acronyms, you can really go to town in formulas. But they're actually fairly commonsensical stuff. It's all the art of common sense. It's not. It's less science than just really just kind of thinking through what matters. Those are some of the functions, and customer satisfaction, and you'll probably see dips in customer satisfaction before you see the churn numbers. So we'll look for kind of leading indicators as well as kind of the lagging indicators.
Yeah.
But those, I can go on for some more, but those are kind of some of the data elements.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that, and I think as we get close to wrapping up here, what do you see as some of the main elements that case status
some of the levers that we can really pull for success in our business?
Well, I think it's really still focusing on these fundamentals. First off, it looks like those customers that were not in the ideal customer profile are kind of moving off of the ledger, whatever you want to call it. But getting great at that function, really matters, and that organization, should really understand how important they are to the future of the company. And I think we've had a lot of nice growth, and we want to see more of that. I think understanding how that's happening is so we've talked about this, but if we increase the spend, what should we expect?
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously the question of where to put the spend, which is a little bit of a moving target. Conferences have been very effective,
mm-hmm.
and will continue to be so. But maybe as this industry matures a little bit, some of the inbound stuff will produce more and more. And then we've got these enterprise customers who are seem to be all fairly unique.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we learn and talk about a lever? How do we learn to find them and to make them happy and to pull the referral work out of them? That lever will drive as much value and opportunity for companies, probably anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Any ending thoughts or encouragement that you'd like to share with the team as we wrap up?
I really, it's a very exciting time as an investor and as someone who's gone through these things to be with this company right now. And it's a credit to all of the work and tenacity you guys have had during some times that were not as fun.
Mm-hmm.
But you can go from a period of like, hey, it's a good idea to we're not going to make it to, hey, we're going to make it to. Then you start getting really, where you are right now is, this is a good market. This, people really like this product. We could do some serious stuff here, and that's where I feel like the company is right now.
Yeah.
It's really, really starting to hit its stride. So I'm grateful and excited to be part of it, and I hope everyone else is too.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to have you. You're a great contributing member of the board, and I know our team appreciates the ways you've jumped in and helped. So again, Brad Braddock with Meeting Street Capital. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate
Awesome.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it.